already were in the exercise lesson today, you have heard already a little bit about Angular. We will do it in that way that now in this theory lesson we will take a closer look at the first ideas how to develop with Angular. And in the exercise lesson we will take a closer look at the tool chain. So it makes sense that everybody now follows, even if you were not in the exercise lesson today, it shouldn't be any problem to follow what I'm going to tell you now here, okay? But next week we switch groups and then we will take the deep dive into the Angular tooling with the other group, and then we are all up to speed, okay? That's the idea. You will find many of the things that I'm going to show you over the next 50 minutes or so in my slide deck. Here you have the Angular slides. The first part is only relevant for the tooling, so you can skip over that one until you were in the exercise lesson. The important things that we are going to discuss today starts here with the slides with templates and data bindings. Okay? So let's take a look at that one. I'm going to use, for this exercise or for this demo, I'm going to use a platform which is called StackBliss. Those of you who were in the exercise lesson today already have heard about StackBliss. StackBliss is a really great web platform with which you can easily set up new Angular applications, okay? It's not the most powerful development environment, so installing the stuff on your laptop is way more powerful, but StackBliss is a great way to get started and a great way to experiment, to do little trials and hello world applications and things like that. And because we haven't done the tool chain with all of you, we're going to start with StackBliss today. So I'm going to set up a new StackBliss project here, and maybe make it a little bit larger and move the output to a separate window. So what I now have is on the left hand side here, I have my project. You see the source code here, and the important thing is here on the right hand side. Oh, that's really hard to read because the sun is coming up. Doesn't work. Okay. Okay. So. Can I somehow switch to a light theme? Maybe that works better.
In workspace settings, you can change the
in workspace settings. Where is that?
Yes, settings and edit.
The workspace settings.
And the first line uncomment.
Thank you. You were faster than me. And light, I assume. Is that better? No. Let's reload it. Okay. Well, not really, right? It's dark again, also, although it says light. Okay, you can try StackBliss at home. I will do it locally because then I can run Visual Studio Code and there I can zoom in and do things like that. So let me quickly open up here locally. If you want to follow along, feel free to use StackBliss, absolutely no problem. So let me quickly navigate here. And the intro. This was the introductional demo that I created with your colleagues in the exercise lesson today. So, I think that works a little bit better at least, right? Okay, very good. So here on the left hand side, in the source app folder, you find the source code of this application. The rest is just generated code. We will discuss it in the exercise lesson. Today we will focus, or now in this lesson, we will just focus on the source app directory. And there, I will open the HTML file on the one hand side and the TypeScript file on the other hand side. And I would like to talk a little bit about one of the most important features of Angular, and that's data binding. Data binding frees you from having to write a lot of code to transfer your variables from TypeScript into HTML and the inputs of the user from HTML into TypeScript. And I will just show you some important things. Many of them are pretty easy to understand. However, you can combine them so that you can solve even complex projects or complex problems with just a few lines of code. Let me show you what I mean. I will simplify the HTML on the left-hand side. So I will just have an H1 tag here, something like this. On the left-hand side, you see it just says welcome to. Let's run this application. npm start. In Stackless, you don't need to do npm start. It's compiled automatically. But on my machine, I have to run npm start. If you don't know what that means, or what that does in the background, we will cover that in the exercise lesson. So, let's quickly get that guy running. Welcome to my first demo. And if we take a look here, my first demo comes from the TypeScript code. See that one? That is, at here, is a so-called interpolation. This interpolation enables you to bind a variable from TypeScript into HTML. It looks trivial. Well, it is, kind of, but you can create interesting things here. For instance, if we create a constructor, let's do that. We don't need so much comments here. Okay? And inside of the constructor, we, for instance, do something like a set interval. The set interval gets a callback, and inside the callback, I say this.title plus equals exclamation mark, and we do that every 250 milliseconds. Oh, sorry, I've recently programmed too much C# and so I forgot. If I do that one, let's see what's going to happen. You see the exclamation marks? That's the point. We can just change the variable in TypeScript, and Angular will care for refreshing the user interface automatically. We never have to write some kind of jQuery code or get element by ID and change the inner text and things like that. We just manipulate the variable and Angular will care for the rest. This is a so-called one-way binding, or as I told you, interpolation, one way, because we have the variable in TypeScript and the content of the variable is bound to HTML. Get the idea? Good, we can remove the set interval again because it was just for demo purposes. Imagine that you load data from a database or from a web service or whatever. You calculate some kind of data in your application. You just assign the result into a variable and Angular displays this variable on the screen. Okay? Does it work the other way around too? Yes, it does. Let me show you how that works. We can, for instance, add a button here. Very simple. Button type equals button and click me. So let's do it this way so we can see it a little bit better. If we do that, we will have a button. Now on the right-hand side, we can create a function. We can say public onClicked. And inside of the onClicked, we say this.title plus equals, let's make it 2 exclamation marks. Okay, get it? Now, how can we trigger this function when the user clicks this button? This will be now a binding the other way around. We do something in HTML, the user executes some kind of action, and this action should trigger something in TypeScript. For that, we have a different syntax. We can say click, see that one? And then we just write what we want to do. For instance, you see that one? You should get IntelliSense here. If you do not get IntelliSense, so if Angular does, or Visual Studio Code or so, does not offer you this, this method here directly in the editor, I have a tip for you. You have to install this plugin in Visual Studio Code. If you use StackBliss, you don't need to do that because it's automatically already there. Okay? But if you follow along in Visual Studio Code, you have to install this plugin. Then everything's fine. So let's see whether this works. I go back here, and if I click on click me, and click me, and click me, and click me, you'll always see whenever I click, I get additional exclamation marks. And that screen is really showing you one of the most important things that you will in practice use in Angular. It's data binding in both directions. Change something in TypeScript, boom, user interface refreshes. User does something in the user interface, and you can easily call a method in TypeScript. Get the idea? Questions? Good? Very good. We wouldn't even need onClicked here. We could even write here directly title equals title plus something like this. If I say that one, and if I do it again, see, it still works. So what you can do is inside of this click stuff here, you don't necessarily just have to write a single method call. You can do nearly whatever you want. Well, you can't write a for loop and things like that. That does not work. But if you can write it into a single statement, something like this, it just works. You know what I mean? However, this is not good style. It works, but please do not put business logic into the HTML view. As you know, we have this interesting concept of spaghetti code. Spaghetti code means that different concepts are mixed together. View and logic, for instance. A little bit of logic is intertwined into UI, is intertwined into logic, and then you have a big messy ball of spaghetti that cannot be maintained by anybody. This is spaghetti code, so you shouldn't do that. You should be very, very careful. Never add business logic to the view layer. That leads to bad code. So, it is a better idea, although we can do it, to just call the onClick method here. Okay? By the way, the thing with the expressions is true here too. For instance, I could say my number equals 41, and then I can do, let's say H2, and here I say my number plus 1. That works too. So I can add expressions here. I can do calculations. So if I go here, you see 42. Wow, that's exactly what I wanted to have. So I can do calculations. Questions so far? Fine. Up until now, you should remember interpolation and these round brackets here. This is a so-called event binding in Angular because we are binding to an event. Good? Next one. Can we somehow allow the user to enter something, for instance, in an input box and write the result back into our variables? Let's try that. Let's add an input here, type input. Yep, that's it. And now comes the important part. What do we typically write if we want to assign the input a value? We just write value equals to, and then somewhere here we write something. If I do it like that, input value ASDF, we will get an input field with the value ASDF. Would it be possible to display the title here instead? Well, let's try it. Title and, no, it doesn't work. Now it just says title. Okay, boring. However, there is a special syntax. If you want to bind, and now listen closely, if you want to bind an attribute like value to a variable, you use a different kind of brackets these ones. The square brackets. Square brackets in Angular means do not interpret the value of the attribute, title, as a constant string, but this is really an expression. So evaluate the expression. Try to find a variable which is called title and put the value exactly here. Let's see. Woohoo! My first demo works. What happens if I change something? Nothing happens. Okay? Yeah. We will fix that. Wouldn't it be nice if we would, if it would be possible to express a so-called two-way binding, so that we can say, take the title from TypeScript and write it into HTML, and then if the user changes the input, write the result immediately back into TypeScript, so you could easily write it in a database or a web service or whatever you want. This is possible. For that, we have to combine data binding, the square brackets, with event binding. There is a JavaScript event or a DOM event that is thrown by the input whenever something changes. It doesn't matter, it's a detail, we don't have to cover that now. But the result, because we need two things, data binding and event binding, is that we need to use this service. And inside of this stuff, we have to say ng modal. Okay? Let's try that. Let's save that. And it breaks. If I hit F12, see that one? Can't bind to ng modal since it's not a known property of input. Something goes wrong. How can I fix that? In Angular, there is a very important file. And this file is called app module ts. Here it is. And in this app module ts, you can import so-called modules. We will cover modules in more detail in the next week probably. But today, just think of modules as a kind of library where you can pull in additional functionality into Angular. And two-way data binding just doesn't work out of the box. You have to pull in a certain module in order to enable two-way data binding. Okay? And the module is called the forms module. The forms module is not already there. We have to import it. Forms module from Angular forms. Don't worry, you have exactly that code in my slides. So if you didn't remember what I just typed, you can copy it from my slides later on. The forms module enables us to use two-way data binding. Because, well, it's for forms, for input forms. This is why you do that. Okay, let's give it a try. If we close the app component HTML here, and if we open it up here, yep, you see, the reds quickly disappeared. This is exactly what we wanted to have. And if I go in now here, you see, our app works again. And if I now change something, take a look at the H1 at the beginning, it's automatically two-way bound. Immediately, if you change something, it's written to TypeScript, and because in TypeScript we have one-way binding to the H1 at the top, it's refreshing the whole UI everywhere. Get the idea? Any questions so far? Good. We are still just scratching the surface. We can do so much more. The next thing that I would like to show you, let me quickly change the layout here again. This is what I want to have. The next thing that I would like to show you is arrays. How can I handle arrays? Can I do something interesting with arrays? Yes, we can. For instance, we can define a to-dos array. This is an array of strings. Let's say, what are our to-dos? We have to go shopping, we have to do our homework, we have to, I don't know, listen to music, whatever. Doesn't matter. If I just create a paragraph tag here, and I go to-dos, something like this, then the result will not be very promising. It displays something which is okay. It just takes the to-do items, adds a comma in the middle, and that's it. Well, that's okay, but if we want to have a nice, beautifully formatted list of to-do items, this doesn't give us very much. So we need to do something else. And there, we can do the following. We can say, give me an unordered list, a bulleted list. Create a list item. And now we have a new syntax here in Angular. We can say star ng4, like a for off loop. Let item of to-dos. This to-dos here, this to-dos relates to this to-dos. And the for loop is going to repeat the list item for each element in to-dos. Automatically, without you having to write anything. So, we can do the following item. And if we do that and go to the result, whoa, we have a list of to-do items. I will leave it on the screen for a second so you can, if you want, follow along or ask questions. Do you get the concept? The important thing to remember is that this stuff isn't executed once. If in TypeScript you just write todos.push and you add something, the UI will automatically be updated. You get a new list in the list items. Any questions? Good? Okay. So for instance, we can add another button here. Button, type equals button, add item, and here we just say click. Oops. Add item. And of course, we have to add a new function here. Public add item. And what do we do? This.todos.push something. So we just write a little bit of TypeScript code that adds something to the to-dos array. By the way, don't worry if you see such red squigglies, although you have already created the method. If you do it this way around, and you shouldn't do that, Visual Studio Code takes a while. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute or something, until it refreshes its errors and this thing will go away. That's a false positive, okay? So don't worry if you do it in this way. So if you go here and say add item, you see, we can add elements. So isn't that a huge progress compared to what we did in the first semester? Definitely it is. It is much easier to write complex data-driven applications with a framework like Angular, for instance. Now, let's do something that is a little bit more tricky. I would like to have a button right next to the list item here with which I can delete the item from the list. Can we do that? Of course we can do it. How? What we can do is we can create a button here directly inside the ng4, type equals button, and let's use just an X for delete. See, then we have a list and I can click on the X, or I should be able to click on the X here. So now it's getting more, it's getting trickier. I can say public remove item. I don't know whether we have parameters. We will see. Do something. We are not yet sure. We can call this guy. Click remove item. Okay. Huh. How should remove item know what to remove? Any suggestions? Yeah?
The name of the item.
The name of the item, you mean something like this?
Yes.
And that's exactly what we can do. We can easily access the variable of the for each loop directly inside the call. You can do even more. ng4 supports a lot of other options. You can get the index of the current element and things like that, but I don't want to dive that deep into the ng4 yet because we just have 50 minutes and so we need to go forward. So, on the right hand side, we get the item, which is in our case a string, because to do is an array of string. Good. And how do we remove the item from the collection? Who knows it? This dot to-dos dot what? Who has an idea? Which function could we use? Yeah.
Splice.
Splice. I agree. We can use splice. Splice gets the start number. What can I do? This dot to-dos dot, there is an index of method where I can say look for the item, and the splice method also gets the number of items that we want to remove. So we are looking for the item, get the index, second index, and then we just remove the element at that index. It's not perfect, we could do it more elegantly with the ng4 and indexing and so on, but for now it should hopefully work. So if I click on homework, boom, homework is gone. If I add an item and now I remove the item again, boom, it's gone. Yeah? So this is exactly what we wanted to have. By adding the button inside of the ng4 loop, we can now call this method for the item that is currently in the loop. Take a second and think of how much code you would have to write without any framework. Get element by ID and do all that stuff magically. It would have been a lot of code that you have to write. Do you see the positive effects of having a data binding framework like Angular? So let's quickly recap what we now have here on the screen. Which syntax elements? We have an interpolation, like this. We have something like this, the round brackets for event binding. We have a syntax like this one for two-way binding. We have a syntax with the star, and the name of this kind of binding is a so-called structural directive. Why is it a structural directive? Because it changes the structure of the HTML by repeating one element over and over again. It's changing the structure, not only the values. A structural directive. We have learned that we can use expressions in data bindings, and we have learned that we can call methods in the code behind file. Something like this one. Good? Questions? Everything unclear or everything clear? I hope everything is clear, because yeah, it's not that difficult. Let's quickly go into the slides and take a look what I have written there. On the first slide, you see the interpolations. One-way data binding from TypeScript into HTML, and the reminder that this can be an expression, not just a variable name. Here, we have the syntax for doing a one-way binding into an attribute. Here you see the event binding. Click on save something. And you see the two-way binding, ng-mode. By the way, if you want to know more for any of these syntax elements, just follow the hyperlinks which are in my slides. And this will bring you directly into the Angular documentation portal where you can read all the details about these things. And there are a lot of details, believe me. Here you have the important tip for the forms module. If ng modal doesn't work, you have to add the forms module. I will zoom in a little bit because of the sun. You don't see it very good, but I hope you can read it somehow now. Here you have the import statement, and here you have the import element in the ng modal decorator. We will talk about decorators later. Good? Here you have the ng for loop. Here is the ng for loop. This is the loop that we use to display the list of elements on the HTML site. Okay? This would now really pay off. Well, not now, but at the end, it really pays off to take a look at the documentation because it supports a lot of interesting stuff. For instance, if I scroll down a little bit, you see one of the most important features of the ng for loop, besides just the ng for loop. You can say, give me hero of heroes, but then you can say semicolon let I equals index. And that will give you a zero-based index of the element that is currently in the loop. So the first one will be 0, the next one, the next 2. So if we would have used that one, we would not have to use the index of element. You know what I mean? So this is a very interesting microsyntax, and still, that's just the tip of the iceberg. ng4 can do a lot more. If you are interested, you can take a look at it, but this is the bare minimum of what you are going to need for the exercises in the next few weeks. There is also an ng if statement. Maybe let's close with the ng if statement here. We could, for instance, say here, paragraph, we have a critical alert. Okay. And here we have variable alert equals true. And now we can, for instance, say star ng if alert. Get the idea? The star ng if will remove the entire subtree from HTML if the expression is not true, truthy. You know what I mean? That is very useful for conditional displaying of error messages and things like that. Star ng if. It's a structural directive, just like ng4, because it's changing the structure of the HTML. Good? Clear? And then there is also an ng switch and an ng switch case, which I will not do currently. I think you can look it up in the documentation yourself. That shouldn't be any problem, and I think you know from other programming languages what switch and switch case is. Good? Nice. So, with that, I have a small homework for you. In the folder Angular, you have an exercise which is called Toolrechnen. Do you know what Toolrechnen is? Can you remember that from elementary school? You start with the starting number. For instance, here you see it. The starting number is 5, so you start with 5. And then you multiply by 2, by 3, by 4, and so on. Here you define the height. And then you divide by 2, by 3, by 4, and at the end you have to have the same result as at the beginning. Okay? Elementary school kids use this exercise to practice multiplication and division. And we want to write an app for that, a web app. Your job is to create a Toolrechnen app that allows me to enter a start value, a height, and when I click calculate, I would like to see this output. Okay? If I enter a value in the height field, which is lower than 2, see it here, then I would like to see an error message here, and the calculate button must be disabled. Okay? This is my suggestion for the first exercise. You can do it this week or you wait until next week. So this is just the first exercise that gives you a possibility to play a little bit with Angular. I will not give this exercise until next week because I would like to cover the tooling with the whole class. So yeah, this is something, try it. You can earn an extra point. I would like everybody to give StackBliss a try. So if you solve this problem on your own, not just copying my solution, because you have a sample solution already here. So not just copy it, I will recognize my own solution, believe me, okay? So give StackBliss a try, create this small solution, and then send me a link to your StackBliss editor just via email. That's fine, okay? And if it works, I will take a look at it, and if it works, you get an extra point. It's as easy as that. In StackBliss, I know that you can't really read it on the screen, but I will zoom in so you will hopefully recognize it. You can get the share link here. Just click on share. Here is share up here. And then you get the link, send me the link, and you can get an extra point. It's an easy extra point. So I really recommend give it a try, because then you get up to speed. A small hint, a small tip, if you want to create, if you want to build your app a little bit, if you want to give it a nice look and feel, you can specify the formatting of your app in the CSS files which accompany your components. What we have been doing today is we edited something which is called a component. You will learn more about modules and component next week. But currently we are just dealing with one component, app component TS. And if you want to add the formatting here, you have to change the component formatting exactly there. Okay? So if you add something here, for instance, let's say we have all the H1s and we would like to have the color in red. Let's do it something like this. If I go here into my first demo, then you see the CSS was applied to this component. Now comes a very important tip. Later on, in a few weeks, we will have more complex applications that consist of multiple of these components. Each component has its own CSS file. And the CSS style settings that you add to one component is only limited to this component. That's a feature, okay? So if you work together, two of you working together, one says my component should have H1s in red, and the other guy says my H1s are yellow. So what should the system do? Typically, things break, but not in Angular. If you add a CSS like that, and everybody adds the CSS rule to his or her component, everything is fine. Because the CSS rules, by default, are scoped to the component. They are not global. For those of you who were in the exercise lesson today, you already learned a place where you can add global formatting in the styles.css. The other will learn about that next week. Good? And of course, as everything in Angular, you can change this behavior, you can turn off local CSS styles and things like that, but out of the box, it just works. Okay? So, if you want to style your solution so that it looks really nice, and you can do that exactly. Good. Any questions, comments? Yeah.
What are the index and main file for?
The index and main file. Please be patient until next week, then we will dive right into it. The short version for today is for the typical simple application, you don't care for it. It's generated and you never have to change anything there. It's the entry point, it's the start point where the browser launches Angular. The browser loads the index.html page, the browser loads the main.ts file, and from there on Angular takes over control. So it's a kind of entry point for the Angular system. When we have the exercise lesson next week, I will go into much more details about how these things work together. Okay? For now, just leave them as they are, they just work. Further questions? You might ask yourself, why haven't we done that at the beginning of the year? Why did we have to say npm init and tsc init and maintain everything by hand? Well, I told you in the morning already, if you don't know the basics, you are lost when you have any kind of problems. You have to understand at least the basics. In real world, you often don't apply the basics anymore because they are automated by tools like the Angular CLI or like StackBlitz. But sometimes things break. And then you have to have the understanding how these things work together. Otherwise, you can't fix problems. Good? Everything clear for the homework? I will add it to WebOtis, the link to the GitHub repository, to the GitHub page where you have the specifications so you don't forget the link. Nice? With that, I say thank you. We'll see each other next week.